Wasatch Report, shooting straight on everything from prepping to politics.
Welcome, everybody, and happy Sunday, February 25th, year of our Lord, 2018. This is a special edition of the Wasatch Report on the Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny. I'm Suzanne Sherman, and joining me tonight is Jeff Johnson, host of the Paradigm Shift and co-founder of the network. There is no Renegade and Rambler Radio Show this evening. Daniel Bailey, the other founder and also the host of the Bailey Report, has another obligation that he must tend to, but fear not. Our newest addition to our network and talent, Justin Spears, co-host with Mike of the show The Other Side, is with us tonight, and we have a special presentation. We are going to be discussing Agenda 21. In the wake of the recent shooting in Broward County, or we should call it Coward County, Florida, we have discussions on the mainstream media pretty much sticking to two topics. One, on the one side, AR-15s must be banned right here, right now. We must do something. On the other, we must make schools safer. We must arm the teachers. We need to look at what is really the problem here. On the special edition of The Other Side, I joined Justin to talk about the problem with schools themselves. I also did a show earlier this week produced by Jeff Johnson, who also joined in with me, with Dr. Marianne Block from the Block Center in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. If you missed that, that was February 21st. Go give that a listen. That show gave you information that you will not hear on any other mainstream media news outlet. We discussed the role of psychotropic drugs, why kids are being drugged. There's a financial incentive, why nobody is talking about the link between the use of these drugs and violent behavior. I encourage you, this is a series that we're doing to touch on what is the problem with our culture, what is the problem with our education system, why are these kids turning to violence? And by the way, why are they taking this violence to schools? Clearly, they could unleash this carnage anywhere. Something's going on with the schools. Rather than trying to tweak these schools, why don't we figure out what is inherently wrong with the schools? You can't make them safer. You can't turn them into police states. They're already a path to prisons. What can we do to address the problem with them? Probably get the national government out of them. We've talked about localizing control over them, but there's something far more nefarious that is affecting schools, and this is something that nobody has brought up at all in the wake of the recent shootings, and that is Agenda 21, Agenda 30. So joining me tonight, Jeff Johnson, Justin Spears. Jeff, thank you. How are you tonight?
I'm doing well, thank you, and I'm in the background promoting the show on Facebook. There we go. I just posted on Facebook that we're live, so I'm doing well. It was a long week, but it was a long week, but I'm glad that I had the weekend off. Unfortunately, I got to go back to work tomorrow, but that's part of life.
Well, your efforts behind the scenes are always appreciated. I always seem to catch you when you're doing something else. And Justin Spears, you're going to chime in tonight because you have these perspective. If our listeners are not familiar with you yet, you are a public school teacher. And we had a discussion as from your perspective, it is realistic to think that arming teachers is the answer. And you can go back to that episode of The Other Side and catch that. And Justin, do you guys have your own separate Facebook page as well?
We do. And thanks for having me on this evening. I'm really looking forward to this. Listeners can find us on Facebook. We are on facebook.com/TOS podcast. You can also find me personally on Facebook. I'm pretty active on there as well. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways. We have our own YouTube channel that's part of the Cerberus Radio Network as well. It's the Other Side podcast, and you can find that and subscribe to our YouTube channel on there to find all of our other episodes. As Suzanne said, we've done quite a bit here recently with us both being public school educators. We have quite a bit to say about this topic.
And you and Mike also have your show is syndicated on a station in Indiana. Let's give that information out as well.
Yeah, that's right. That's something that people can listen to nationwide on the internet as well. But here locally, we're in central Indiana, out of Crawfordsville, Indiana. We're on 92.1, 1550 AM WCVL. So if you'd like to catch that online, we're on Saturday mornings at 8 a.m. Eastern Time on WCVLAM.com. And those will rerun the show that we record live on Wednesday night on our YouTube channel. They will rebroadcast that on Saturday mornings at 8 a.m. Again, that's WCVLAM.com.
Well, kudos to CVL. Kudos to them for getting your message out, because as you know, we say stuff that you just don't hear on the mainstream media. And that's one of the reasons why I do what I do, why we all do. You know, I'm not trying to say I'm better than them, but if you want something done right, you got to do it yourself. And they're not getting the information that people really need to see. So that's why we are tireless and we are so dedicated to getting this message out there for you. By the way, all three of us are together on Google Hangouts, which means our telephone line is open at 717-467-1736. You can also send us messages. We have a fan page, facebook.com/CRN. Also a radio page on here, facebook.com/Cerberus Radio Network. And mine, you can find me, Suzanne Sherman, also Cowgirl Esquire. I try to read the messages as they come in. Housework being done on the radio, not mine at home. Never, that's done. Housework here for the radio show being done. Let's talk about Agenda 21, which is also now we have Agenda 30. We have this code name, as I say all the time. You want to take something really crappy, put it over to the people, pull the wool over their eyes, and call it something that they can feel good about implementing. Case in point, affordable health care. Doesn't that just sound fantastic? Well, the reality is proven it's anything but. So turning to Agenda 21, we have this term they use called sustainable development. It is really a comprehensive plan for global, national, and local action. The philosophy here is to bring humans under control of an elite few, and it elevates nature above the the beneficial purposes and needs of humankind. Sustainable development, protect the earth. This all sounds fantastic. No, I'm thinking no. They have 5 means by which they can achieve these ends. And Jeff, I think we have an audio of this.
Yes. Did you want cut one? Is that what we want now?
Is that the one where it lists what they intend to do, ending national sovereignty?
Yes.
Yes, let's roll with that.
Sustainable developers have designed a global movement coordinated through a global to local action plan to create world government in accordance with certain objectives. These objectives include an end to national sovereignty, the abolition of private property, the restructure of the family unit, and increasing limitations and restrictions on mobility and individual opportunity.
Now, as we're doing this, all the comments are coming in. This is a real hot topic for a lot of people, so the response is very encouraging. My friend Nancy from Virginia is saying sustainability is a buzzword now for me. When I hear it, I think carbon tax and globalist agenda, the loss of private property. And I apologize, I believe this Nancy is from Las Vegas. So let's examine these. Ending national sovereignty. Well, obviously we have the open borders. We have uncontrolled migration, illegal immigration, abolishing private property. But this is what is particularly nefarious to me is number 3 is restructuring the family unit. restrict mobility and individual opportunity, abandon unalienable rights. To me, and you guys might have a different opinion, but I think right now what we're seeing, particularly on the domestic front, is 3 and 5. Restructure the family unit and abandon unalienable rights. And if we see what's going on in the education system, if we see how these kids are being treated, what they are also being taught, and we're going to turn to Justin on that for a moment. I hear some background noise there. I'm not sure what that is, Jeff. But what we see when we have the results of the problems inherent to the school systems, what happens now? We turn to gun control. What is an unalienable right? The right to life, the right to defend yourself and your property. We're seeing an attack on 2 fronts. What are you seeing in the schools? You're in the trenches there, Justin, as a public school teacher. What evidence do you have that Agenda 21 is real and affecting our kids?
Well, yeah, I think from what we've discussed so far here, right off the bat, I think one of the things that you can see there in terms of inalienable rights, and I spent a lot of time in U.S. government, and for the listeners who may not be overly familiar, I teach government economics and a world history geography class on high school, mostly seniors. In my opening module or unit in U.S. government, we spent a lot of time talking about the movement of the liberal thought and thinking a little bit about ideas of what are rights, what are God-given rights. And when we go through the Bill of Rights and we go through the Constitution, the kids you can almost kind of see them wrestling with it in their minds because they just simply don't read it and understand it that way. It's kind of been ingrained into them that you only have the right to free speech or to peacefully assemble or to practice your religion or own a weapon to protect yourself because the government grants you that authority and that right. And that's what the Constitution is all about. That's the perspective that they have coming into, and it takes a lot of time to unpack that and then, teach them these are natural rights. They exist because you are a human being, not because government has bestowed this upon you. So there's a lot of unlearning that has to take place there. And that's a very difficult process before you can move forward. So, yeah, I think that there's definitely been, and then that I think moves toward the latter half of what I was going to mention here with this as well, is the dependency. Because when that is ingrained into your mind, that you only have rights because government grants you those rights, then you become dependent, right, on the government to continue to provide that. And that then also means that the government can take away at any time they decide to those rights as well. And so that mindset that many kids have, and this gets into things like welfare programs. We've got a high number of kids that are on free and reduced lunch, other types of social dependency programs. And so they're dependent again there on the government to provide, and it becomes a birthright, that becomes the birthright, much like we always talk about the government being the civil religion of the day, right? I mean, it's something that you have to kind of, live I can't work and earn money because then I'll lose my welfare. It's just the mindset that has crept into people. We've lost that independent, free nature that I think we had early on in this nation's history, and that's where I see the biggest issue related to that.
Well, and that ties in also, you and I did a show together on the other side about preparedness and how people are just so compelled to just wait for the government to assist them in times of need, wait for the government to bring them bottled water or generators and that sort of thing. But, what I've noticed as we have this discussion is when you go back to how the educational process is indoctrinating us to accepting centralized dominant governments, this Agenda 21, and this dawned on me as I'm listening to you, is really just a natural progression of the Marxist movement and the indoctrination for the children. Now, remember, Hillary Clinton had said when they talked about universal preschool and daycare was we have got to get to these kids early, not we need to help parents watch their children. We have got to get to these kids. That sounds predatory to me in nature. So the indoctrination starts very early on, and turning back to the Marxist socialist influence, I submit to you the Pledge of Allegiance. And this is something that upsets a lot of conservatives. The Pledge of Allegiance is taught to the children very early on. How many people see on social media parents bragging how their 5-year-old in kindergarten has learned the Pledge of Allegiance? Well, if you know your history, you will understand that one nation, indivisible, is precisely what the founders and the ratifying states and the conventions prohibited expressly. They reserved the right to secede from the Union. We were divisible. 13 sovereign and independent states meant nation at the time, came together and formed a voluntary union. Francis Bellamy's brother, I think it was his cousin, that wrote a utopian novel that described America as being under control of a strong central authority which controlled the production of all the food. You control the food, you control the people. Well, what happened in the 1950s, because of the Cold War with the Soviet Union, our government interjected the words "under God" to differentiate us from a communist, godless regime. So what we have now is a conservative faction that loves the Pledge of Allegiance for the wrong reasons, and a liberal progressive faction on the left that hates it for the wrong reasons. And what's the crux of this issue? What's the cause of this? People don't understand their history with regards to our rights. And you mentioned that earlier. We are taught, and every summer, 3 so far, they keep asking me back. I go and teach a class at the Patriot Camp in Utah, and my topic that I choose, and they allow me to teach, is the Bill of Rights. And it absolutely floors these kids when they realize that these are not rights that the government has given them. They pre-exist, and they are only to restrict the general government. So I tell them, there is no such thing as a First Amendment right. There is no such thing as a Second Amendment right. Because what happens then is these nefarious politicians say that these rights that they have granted are subject to regulation. And this is what they do time and time again. Now, Donald Trump is saying, well, I think what we're going to do is give some bonuses to school teachers to take firearms training. Justin, you're a school teacher. My thought on this, if you give somebody financial incentive, never mind, there is no constitutional authority for the general government to do this at all. But I'm concerned that people are going to do this for financial reasons rather than a love of firearms and a desire to protect. That is precisely the wrong person I want to be armed in a school. What is your thought on that?
Yeah, no, I think that is a really important thing to consider and think about. And just to wrap up that last point there too, that I encourage the listener to think about the curriculum and the standards that are taught in schools, and who gets to set those, who gets to determine arbitrarily what is taught and what is not taught, how it's taught. That's all under control as well by this central authority. When Common Core was unleashed a number of years ago, the state of Indiana rejected it, and the Republicans in the state made a big deal about it. But essentially, they wrote their own standards that mirrored Common Core. They just wanted to package it as though they had a spine and stood up against the government. But in reality, the standards weren't quite that different. They changed a couple of words, but they were essentially teaching the same. As a matter of fact, my boys, both second and fourth grade boys, both use books that teach Common Core principles. So they're still being applied in the classroom. So that's something else that's important to think about there as well. Now, going to the idea of arming teachers, I've said this before, and as I've thought about this more throughout the weekend, we live in a day and age where everybody needs to have a hot take. You're supposed to take this radicalized, flaming hot, white hot stance on something and die on a hill on it. And if you don't, then you're a coward, you're spineless. Honestly, I waffle back and forth a little bit on it, but I lean more towards the side of thinking this is a really bad idea. In addition to what you were talking about with the incentive aspect to this, and bonuses and things of that nature, as you mentioned on Saturday, There's a taxpayer dollars that are being used. Schools are already strapped for cash. We have several school districts here locally where referendums have failed, and they've had to lay off teachers, and class sizes are just continuing to increase. Resources in general are squandered. That's something you never hear talked about in schools when they're clamoring for more money. There's never any call for audits or looking at how the money is currently being spent. So to throw more money at this, it just seems like it's going to be a waste of taxpayer dollars. The other part that I've tried to get people to think logically about on this is that, human beings are fallible. Their teachers are humans as well. We have things going on in our lives, and whether that, maybe a teacher that's having financial trouble, maybe going through a divorce, a tough time with, family relations, whatever it might be. The last thing that you want is somebody having a bad day with a firearm on them and then turning a bad situation worse. With the situation with intruders, there is a chance for security to work. There's a chance to keep the intruder out of the building or to squash it quickly. You got a teacher that's armed in the building with it shut down on the inside, and they snap, whatever happens. That's, I think, a recipe that you don't want there. And so you got to consider those things, not to, fearmonger or anything like that, but it definitely is something to think about there as well. So, I kind of come down on the end that this is not a good thing. And there's several other things that we need to look at and focus on. The original cause, the first cause of why we're even having this conversation, and that is looking at the mental health of our students. What is it that the modern day school system is doing, or partly doing to our kids to lead them to this place where they want to go carry out these acts? And let's look at that. Let's tackle that. I know it's difficult. I know it's hard, but it needs to be done. This thing of, going in like with a broken bone to the ER, and the doctor just saying, here, take a bunch of ibuprofen because that'll mask the pain, right? You haven't addressed the problem that you have a broken bone. And so that's what we're doing here by talking about gun control and security measures and all that. Yes, it's important. It's an aspect to it, but you're jumping in midway to the problem here. We've got to get to the root cause, and that's the mental health of our students and our kids in this country today.
And
Suzanne?
Yeah.
Suzanne, I'm going to go and play the media file number 3 and media file number 4, which is goal 3 and goal 4 from Agenda 2030, which is the national one, but it'll tie in with what Justin just said. So
yeah, because I'm about to get to that too. So that'll be perfect timing.
The first one is he said something about mental health. The first one's on mental health, and then he said something about Common Core. The second one will be on Common Core. So it's goal 3 and goal 4 of 2030.
Goal number 3, ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages. Translation, mandate 100+ vaccines for all children and adults at gunpoint, threatening parents with arrest and imprisonment if they refuse to cooperate. Push heavy medication use on children and teens while rolling out screening programs. Call mass medication prevention programs and claim they improve the health of citizens.
That's goal 3. Now here comes 4.
Okay.
Goal number 4, ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong opportunities for all. Translation, push a false history and a dumbed-down education under Common Core education standards that produce obedient workers rather than independent thinkers. Never let people learn real history, or else they might realize they don't want to repeat it. And I also want to add that you need to remember that Common Core is not just for America. It is intended to be an international agenda.
Okay. Now, the mandatory vaccines. Yes, absolutely. We are seeing that in California. They used to have a philosophical waiver that you could take. A pediatrician in the California legislature pushed forward a bill that Jerry Brown signed that is no longer and option. What we're seeing now in the schools also is this focus on equality. You never hear them talking about liberty. You don't hear them giving adequate and accurate representations of our founding generation, because those men, Thomas Jefferson, Patrick Henry, James Otis Jr., Samuel Adams, they talked about liberty. They talked about freedom, limited government, a representative government. We don't have that. Now what we do is they write them off and lambast them as white slave owners that were misogynistic, Islamophobic, homophobic, you name it, they were everything bad. What we heard, and there was another video, and I don't know if we have it in here, but the goal of the way they get about reaching this goal is to steal and indoctrinate a generation of children. And we have seen this now from 2000 to 2015. They've been doing this, and we are seeing the results right now. And one of the ways they steal and indoctrinate a generation of children, remember, Hitler did the same thing, was to transfer loyalty from the family to the government. I wrote an article about this. Church of the National Government. Adults are doing the same thing. We're not going to talk about that on this show, but this is exactly what we're seeing. I don't know if you guys remember, there was actually, when Obama was running for office, all this footage of kids telling their ignorant parents, the generation ahead of them, how they needed to be enlightened, support candidate Obama. And Al Gore was in a gymnasium, a high school gymnasium, telling these students, there are things you know that your parents don't know. So here we have a representative of the government trying to indoctrinate children and lead them away from the parents to the government by making the parents look ignorant. And they are being very successful. And we are seeing the results of this. And what they're doing now is, if these kids are indoctrinated to these Marxist ideologies by focusing again on equality, social justice at the schools, they are going to be very amenable and welcoming to this whole UNESCO, United Nations, UNESCO being United Nations, educational, social, cultural organization. They will welcome these platforms. Our founding generation, they would have been shooting by now, but these kids have been indoctrinated to where they are welcoming it. Do you have any thoughts on that, Justin, with how the schools have indoctrinated these children so successfully and alienated traditional values?
Well, yeah, I mean, Mike and I did an episode of The Other Side here recently entitled "Everyone's a White Supremacist," and it was, one of these things where if you have any bit of pride or wanting to preserve your culture or heritage, well, then now all of a sudden you're a racist and everything. And so I've definitely seen, and again, I completely come to the table understanding that I have a limited worldview. I teach in more of a rural area. I have had a little bit of experience in an urban environment prior to taking on full-time. I did some student teaching in urban environments, but definitely the push to multiculturalism. Even when I was going through my program to become a teacher, because I'm a non-traditional teacher, my undergrad degree is in marketing, and I worked in sales and marketing for about 5 years before I entered into a program to become certified. And I now have a master's in education. But in that master's level work, I can't tell you how many classes I sat through where I heard about, pushing this multicultural agenda. And really what that does is it confuses kids. Mike and I talked a lot about that in that episode of, how early we brought up, and I would encourage the listeners to check this out. There's a fairly wealthy suburb of Minneapolis, St. Paul called Edina, Minnesota. And there's a series out there about what they did in their schools where they scrapped their traditional curriculum and instituted this multicultural education. And it was endorsed by Black Lives Matter, the ACLU, the LGBTQ community. So you can kind of get an idea as to what this type of education, they started at the kindergarten level. And they start with self-identifying gender and race and things at ages 5 and 6. where, as you know, that isn't being recognized at that age. Kids, yes, they recognize and realize that people have different skin color, but they don't know what that means. They don't know what that means until it's planted in their mind by these mind-numbed adults that think that they're helping these kids out, but really they're doing just unreversible psychological damage to these kids when they feed them this stuff in the curriculum. So yeah, I definitely have seen a tide in education in the 10 years that I've been in almost now of pushing this agenda and the damage that it's doing.
Well, when I was in California, I remember, again, we need to disrupt the traditional family values. This is also why we have the attack on marriage. And, probably 10 years ago, I was having a discussion at a family member's house with their kids were in high school and the parents. And I said, the schools are trying to take the place of families and traditions. This was before I even heard of Agenda 21. And I said, look at the hours. Let's take a few minutes and think about, we all have kids that we've raised through schools. And even when my son was in second grade, I could not believe the hours of homework that this kid was getting. Look at how they take and steal the family time. They have them getting up to get to school at a ridiculous hour. They keep them late. So we're talking maybe 8 to 3, and then the insane amount of homework. They have extracurricular activities, time that could be spent sitting around the table, going to movies, or doing something with your family, playing board games. Remember when people used to do that with their parents? That time now is taken away, where kids are sitting and reading books on what? Climate change, equality, gender issues, global issues. They are taking that time so the parents cannot influence these children. The other thing I said is, how many times do your kids have to spend their weekends doing homework saying, oh gosh, I can't go to church, I've got to get this paper written? And they laughed at me. And guess what? The crazy lady was right, because this is exactly what they're trying to do. If they can take all this time away from them, particularly on the weekends, guess who doesn't have time to go to church? We want government to be God, not God. And I see this, and we're seeing the result of this. The children are suffering. The families are suffering. The kids are on drugs. When I went to Los Altos to visit family, this was probably 5 or 6 or 5 years back, in the local paper, I actually found a reprint of it, but I'll just paraphrase it and summarize it for you right now. Kids where I grew up in this town, Los Altos, Mountain View, Palo Alto, were having mental breakdowns. They were on a plethora of all these psychotropic drugs because of the stress of the school experience with all the testing. And mind you, this is also Silicon Valley, where the parents are very wealthy. Both of them are likely having to work to pay for the homes, and the property taxes and the living expenses there are simply astronomical. So the kids aren't getting the influence of their parents. They're getting the influence of the teachers, the social pressures, without the influence of the parents. Also, the testing now, and these kids are just absolutely losing their minds, and the pressure for college. You don't have the desire to have a simple life out there. Everybody's struggling to achieve this, accumulate wealth, and that's part of it as well. So they have stolen a generation. They are influencing the parents. Also, how does this affect us? Well, look at our land use out here. Out here in Utah, we just had a huge protest because President Trump scaled back what Obama had done with Bears Ears National Monument. And Trump scaled it way back, and people came from all over the place to come and protest what was going to be done with land in the sovereign state of Utah. People were coming from all over. And I was talking to one woman, I was kind of batting her around, and I said, hey, I understand you're here for Bears Ears. Can you tell me what the deal is? And she said, oh, we want to get this back to where it was. President Obama, had this, he really greatly expanded it, and Trump scaled it all back. And we want people from all over the world to come and visit these places. So I said, wow, I had no idea. So are states actually banning international visitors and tourism to their state parks? Oh, no, 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 no. They're not doing that. But we just believe that this belongs to UNESCO. She gave it away. This land does not belong. Not only does it not belong to the state of Utah where it rightfully belongs, it belongs to UNESCO, Agenda 21, Agenda 30. This goes back to Goal 1, end national sovereignty. Did you want to comment at all, Jeff?
Well, I have goal number 6 was going back to what you guys were talking about with the LGBTQ RLS LMNOP, and then actually goal number 11 goes on with what you're talking about, ending national sovereignty. So I don't, I don't know where to go with this at this point.
Next clip.
What, you want to go with 6 then?
Yeah,
and
let's
go,
do that. Sure.
All right, hold on a second. Here we go. This is goal 6, and it'll be pretty much self-explanatory when he explains it.
Goal number 6, ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. Translation, allow powerful corporations to seize control of the world's water supplies and charge monopoly prices to build new water delivery infrastructure that ensures availability.
Oh, I must have hit the wrong one.
Goal number 7, ensure access to affordable.
All right,
Well,
let me queue up number 11 here.
When you bring up the issue with the water, think about, hasn't Nestle been given a right to take a lot, I have to filter myself here, a lot of water out of the Great Lakes area, and they're shipping it to China. You can't just take a cargo ship full of water, but they can bottle it and send it there. Also in California, that was having severe drought. Nestle, I think, paid $500 to the state of California and was able to pump out hundreds of thousands of gallons from its water table and ship that where? Bottle it up and ship it to China. So here again, we have globalist uses of our natural resources.
Yeah, and I would just chime
Go ahead,
in.
Justin.
Yeah, I was just going to say real quickly too, Suzanne, just to kind of tie up what you were mentioning there about the school replacing the family structure. I have witnessed this firsthand in a number of different ways. I would probably say this is probably the most evident thing that I see on a day in, day out basis. We clearly have a lot of educators who lament the fact that the family unit, isn't supportive, that there aren't, two parents in a house, that, that oftentimes there may be substance abuse usage. We have a number of students who are homeless, who are in foster care. And instead of, again, going back and looking at in what way, shape, or form can we help these kids in their family lives, the school has taken over. There are stories of schools that serve as laundromats where they do clothes for the kids. They, obviously the whole issue of food, with breakfast now and lunch and free and reduced. There's been a big movement here in the state of Indiana that kids who are behind on their bills for their food at school, they can no longer call them out for that because that's shaming them. Now, the reports that I was reading, there were some, I think, that overstepped the lines with how they were doing this. They were putting signs on the kids at school, and I think there was some legitimate shaming that was going on. But even just calling out a kid, and saying like, look, you can't pay your lunch account, why would you question doing that?
And putting a sign on the kids, these are the teachers we want to give guns to.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so, definitely I see a movement where, teachers and the education system more in general. I want to be very careful about not calling out individual teachers because there are some in the education system that, are on the right path and aren't looking to do this, but there are many, many, many that are. So I blame the system like than I do individuals. And it's the system that lends itself to this, right? With like you said, the number of hours that we have them at school and homework and things of that nature.
And clearly, there are teachers that I know personally, you included, that I would completely trust being an armed guard for my child while in the school system. But, turning back to the issue of multiculturalism and the surrendering of sovereignty, remember, our founding generation knew that a homogeneous culture would be able to resist a tyrannical government more than would a culture that was mixed and divided and having contention with each other. That's why, again, we had 13 sovereign and independent states. But within those states, and even as a union, they did have a common goal. What we're seeing now with this migration into the United States, this government subsidized immigration from third world countries with people with completely different cultures, ideologies, and beliefs. We are having this multiculturalism that the founders said and predicted, they were correct, would make us less resilient to tyranny. Also, going back to the LGBTQ LMNOP issue, this is also far more nefarious, because when I was in California, I used to attend some political meetings, and one of the women in the group was a second grade teacher. And she said California was being forced, the teachers were forced to indoctrinate these children, introduce them to the concept of homosexuality. Remember, he had a school bullying czar, and what he wanted to do was stop the bullying of homosexuals in the public school system. Well, really, that was a polite way of saying that people would buy into of, we want to indoctrinate a generation of children into the lifestyle of homosexualities, and this is the way we're going to do it. So this woman
All right,
said,
Suzanne.
Yeah.
Suzanne, I have that clip queued up now. I have the right one. It was goal number 5.
Okay, let me
to play that. And go ahead and finish your thought. But I also want to chime in on the arming teachers after we get done this clip.
Okay, so what she had said was these students that were friends, one of the other kids said to them, "Oh, you two are good friends. You must be homosexuals." So these kids really don't understand what a homosexual is. And really at that early age, do we need to get into the biological and physiological aspects of it? No, we absolutely do not. It's absolutely inappropriate. Kevin Jennings, by the way, this very same safe school czar was honored by NAMBLA, National Man Boy Love Association. So there you go. Go ahead, Jeff.
Hold on, Suzanne. I'm taking a call at the moment. Hold on.
Okay. So
yeah,
I'm going to just...
While he's doing that, Suzanne, I think that last point that you made there is really important, is going back to talking about defining this and indoctrinating and incorporating this into the curriculum in the school corporations. I see this done in a very, very discreet way. The stories that are read in books and the messages that are in there now, the handouts and things of that nature, they're not brash enough to just hand somebody a story, called Jim and John. They work it in a subtle ways, and I think that makes it even more dangerous when you look at it from that regard.
Yeah, and I think what they're doing now is also glorifying it and making children who otherwise would not be attracted to this lifestyle perhaps participating so they feel like they can fit in. California even was entertaining having a law making it, if your child was showing homosexual tendencies, illegal for counseling to correct that. Now, some states, in fact, do have that law. Jeff, did you want to continue? Do we have a caller?
Yeah. No, the caller hung up. So if they want to call back. But I'm going to play that clip number 5, and then I'll come back to that arming teachers, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Goal number 5, yep. Achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. Translation, criminalize Christianity, marginalize heterosexuality, demonize males, and promote the LGBT agenda everywhere. The real goal is never equality, but rather the marginalization and shaming of anyone who expresses any male characteristics whatsoever. The ultimate goal is to feminize society, creating widespread acceptance of gentle obedience, along with the self-weakening ideas of communal property and sharing everything, because only male energy has a strength to rise up against oppression and fight for human rights. The suppression of male energy is key to keeping the population in a state of eternal acquiescence.
Did you want to comment on that before I go to that other subject?
This is something we really do need to talk about, because this really sums up the goal of the pajama boy nation. We have seen boys now criticized. We have this toxic masculinity where members of the armed services are told, or we're told that they're the problem. Masculinity is a bad thing. Masculinity is what keeps us independent. Masculinity is traditional values. They're the head of the household. They protect the women. And by the way, this woman on the air right now, I will stand up and fight. I quipped on somebody's page right earlier because they didn't like what I had said, and a commenter said, you know, you would have been one of the people that wouldn't have fought for fought for the revolution and independence. And I said, I tell you what, if I'd been at Lexington, I likely would have fired the first shot. So don't underestimate the girls. I might not be in STEM, but I will fight for liberty. Go ahead.
Right. Well, this is a major goal, is that, and you can see what he said. He's absolutely correct. If they can get rid of the man, no one's going to stand up to the government. If they're all these metrosexuals, who's going to stand up? Who's going to be that guy in Lexington Green firing that shot? They're not going to be there. And you can see it today. And honestly, I wanted to go to this teacher thing with and talk about law enforcement on that. Unless you wanted to go something, because, okay, it fits in here. Okay, you had these guys that are trained, they're armed, they have body armor on, and they stayed outside. And by the latest account, there was 4 sheriffs that stayed outside and didn't enter while the shooter was inside. And it wasn't until, I guess, I'm not sure if it's the Metro-Dade police or whoever it was, one of the police agencies showed up, and then they started going in. Then the sheriff went in with them. You know, okay, so if we're going to arm teachers, they're going to go take a class. Maybe it's a 6-hour class. Maybe they'll go on the range and they'll shoot. Me in law enforcement, I have to qualify every year. Every year I have to take use of force. I have a myriad of courses I have to take. I've also gone and done scenario training where it puts you in stressful situations. And I tell this story on my show. In that scenario training, it's in the simulator. I shot a civilian. You get tunnel vision. And fortunately, it was a simulator, so I actually did not shoot a civilian. But in that's what happens. It's messy. You put someone that's never, ever been really trained, give them a gun, and you're going to expect them to run into a barrage of bullets. Someone may, probably the most of them won't. So, you know, it's a catch-22 with that. Do I think that teachers should be armed? If they want to be armed and they think they can handle the situation, I would say yes.
Yeah, and I think that what we really need to understand is this needs to be a local decision, and I don't even mean a statewide decision. I really mean a decision that should be handled within the local community. But again, this toxic masculinity and this attack on masculinity ties right in to the LGBT agenda and why it is foisted upon these children, because then we will have, again, a nation of pajama boys. And one of the other objectives here is to make reality something that is not knowable. And once again, this ties into the whole transgender issue. If something as abstract and objective as basic human biology, I do not need to elaborate any further, is not enough for you to know who or what you are as a human being, their objectives have been successful. Math, they turned this into the world of work, where you don't necessarily have to come up with the right answer. And Justin, you'll probably be able to elaborate upon this, but as long as they have a consensus and a subjective answer to something clearly abstract or clearly objective, this to me says why we are falling for all the garbage we're given about budgets, the general accounting office. This will just perpetuate our indebtedness because people don't understand numbers anymore. And this is by design. You mentioned Common Core.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also worth thinking about as well, where do these standards come from? It's kind of like we talk about the members of Congress and people always thinking that these are the smartest people in the room. They're not the smartest people in the room. And so who is it that's writing these standards, whether they be at the state level, at the federal level? How is it that they are coming up with what they are coming up with? I was mentioning in one of my previous episodes on the other side that my fourth grade son, I was kind of going through some of the state standards for fourth grade. And one of the standards that is in there for fourth grade is something along the lines, I read it. And when I read it, I kind of said, I don't even know what that is. And I'm almost 40 years old. It had something to do along the lines that they should be able to read an algebraic equation and analyze it for comparative math or something along those lines. And I just immediately, my mind went to thinking, okay, I'm 10 years old. I'm sitting in a classroom and I'm trying to figure out what this means. I've probably been sitting at my desk for at least maybe an hour at a time, maybe longer, who knows. And I'm trying to make sense of this while the teacher is trying to teach it and giving me handouts. And then if I don't get it, it's boom, on to the next thing because I've got other standards that I need to teach because this is how I'm assessed and how I'm paid is by hitting these standards and getting certain test scores. And it's all a big pyramid scheme. And so kids are frustrated, they're confused, they're dumbfounded by these standards that are arbitrarily written. And like you said, the confusion end of it is the ultimate goal. We don't understand, we get frustrated, we quit. And so when I say that we're $20 trillion in debt and kids don't even bat an eyelash, it's because they can't even begin to conceptualize how much that is. They hear these numbers thrown around and it doesn't even make any sense to them.
And one of the ways parents would be able to have interaction time, even with the heavy workload with school, with homework, would be assisting their kids with their homework. How many times have we heard now that parents don't understand this Common Core math? They are taken out of that process. So the kids come home, they're confused, they don't get the homework done. The parents can't help them. And now also a lot of these kids are being given these laptops and the parents aren't even given access to the curriculum. They don't even know what the kids are being taught. There's a free or a subscription program called Brain Pop, also talking about false narratives, and they have a section on guns, and they're just little animations. It's for younger kids. And when the subject of guns come up, the two characters all of a sudden have a really sad face. And while guns are important for things like hunting and sometimes protecting yourself, the founding fathers never envisioned a society where criminals would be running around in the streets. And I saw this in another book as well. And they also said that the Second Amendment grants individuals rights to keep and bear arms while they are serving in the militia, but no other time. And you also had a fantastic episode on the greatest lie of them all, and that is the myth of Lincoln. And I want people to go to the other side and check out that episode. I'm not sure what number it is, but I know it will be on your page. So folks, this is something that is very nefarious. This is not tinfoil hat, conspiracy theory stuff. Go to Agenda 21, go to the United Nations page, and then all you have to do is go to Agenda 21. I did this once. I didn't even have enough time to scroll through all the pages. What they do, I had a friend of mine that was very active in Gilroy in Santa Clara County. They are implementing Agenda 21 principles because, as we discussed, Agenda 21 is really more of a local initiative, and you can see evidence of this in zoning regulations, setting aside wetlands, and this all sounds really good. Smart meters, well, what can smart meters do? Monitor, keep track of your energy uses, because as we know, as we heard earlier, certain uses of your land are not going to be acceptable when we have a system that is where our behavior is going to be monitored and accepted by these people in the United Nations. We're going to wrap up the show.
Suzanne,
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I just chime in real quick?
Yeah.
I want to chime in on this subject we're talking about, and I want to play one more clip before we're done
Perfect.
for the show tonight.
Yeah, we have just
But
enough time.
I wanted to say I'm agreeing with you guys in this. I sat down when Jason was probably second, maybe third grade, trying to help him with homework, and I sat there and looked at this stuff. I probably sat there for an hour trying to figure out what in the world they're trying to teach a second grader that I can't even figure out as an adult. And so, he's frustrated. Jason to this day hates school. I'm going to tell you right now, hates school. And that was instilled in him at a young age. So
I'm going to be doing another show. I had one with Connor Boyack, and I actually went from private school to homeschooling to unschooling. I'll be doing another show about that. Did you have one more clip before we wrap up? One more
clip, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think this is going to be on subject for what you were just mentioning a moment ago. Hold on, here it comes.
Okay.
Goal number 11, make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. Translation, ban all gun ownership by private citizens, concentrating guns into the hands of obedient government enforcers who rule over an unarmed, enslaved class of impoverished workers, criminalize living in most rural areas by instituting Hunger Games-style protected areas, which the government will claim are owned by the people, even though no people are allowed to live there. Force all humans into densely packed, tightly controlled cities where they are under 24/7 surveillance and subject to easy manipulation by the government. And this right here is more or less the end-all, be-all of this entire agenda. Human settlements, sustainable, inclusive, forcing everyone into dense cities where everything is tightly managed and controlled.
Reminds me of the Warsaw Ghetto. When I watched the Hunger Games and you saw how all these people were put into these units and controlled, I said the Hunger Games is prophecy, and I was laughed out of the barn when I was there. But look at what they want to do. Get everybody into these areas that are inclusive. They are safe. Well, what if these are terms that endear people to maybe accepting these projects? And if you go back and look at the history of public education, this goes back to 19th century Prussia, where they wanted to be able to indoctrinate kids to be complacent, to be pliable, acquiesce to government control, and be good little worker drones. John Dewey in the American school system saw the American public education system as a means by which to achieve social transformation. So it's only natural that Agenda 21 is going to be the progression of the centralization of masses to a one world system is the end game. And we're here to let you people know we have got to put a stop to this. We have got to call them out on what they are trying to do. This is wrong. They are doing it by trying to criminalize, as we heard earlier, Christianity, attacking traditional family values, emasculating our society so they will not be able to stand up and fight. If they can indoctrinate these kids, they just have to wait till the veterans, the warriors die off, because our military has become a social experiment now. So all they have to do is wait. Why do we bother doing this if it's never gonna, if it's hopeless? I don't think it's hopeless yet, but you have to be evangelical. You have to not be afraid to speak up. I was telling a friend of mine today, I spoke up when my kids were in Publix or in the public charter homeschool about the 3 little pigs. I called the teacher. I said, what the heck is up with this? I said, the pig is looking for wood for his house, and he asked the guy to give him some wood. She says, well, what's wrong with that? I said, the pig's supposed to gather his own wood. He's supposed to go and gather his own materials. And it sounds like I am being really overreactive here, but and a friend of mine today said, gosh, I never thought of it that way. They're planting a seed in these kids that just because you want something and somebody else has it, they must give it to you. There was another section, and I know we're going to wrap up really quick, on Scholastic, had a section on math called the commutative property. Had a white girl there handing out money. It said, spread the wealth, handing out money, dollar bills, passing them out to all these minority kids. Do you really think that that was not by design? So I want to thank all of you for joining me. Justin Spears from The Other Side, you host that show with Mike. What episode was the one where you talked about Abraham Lincoln?
Episode 25.
Episode 25, go to their webpage, Facebook, if they're on Facebook, find that. And Jeff Johnson, I believe you and I will be doing a show tomorrow morning, Paradigm Shift, Monday morning. I will be on tomorrow, the Wasatch Report, with Ryan McMacken from the Mises Institute. This has been the Wasatch Report Special Edition on the Cerberus Radio Network, defending liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny. God bless.
Mister, we could use a man like
The Wasatch Report, shooting straight on everything from prepping to politics.
Welcome, everybody, and happy Sunday, February 25th, year of our Lord 2000.